Good morning and welcome to Plug In with Playbook. I'm Anna Palmer, co-author of the Politico Playbook. I'm joined by Jake Sherman, who co-authors Playbook with me. Thank you for tuning in to Politico's virtual programming during the reimagined political conventions as we count down to Election Day. This week, it has been all about the Republican National Convention and President Trump's re-election bid. You can follow the conversation all week on social media using the hashtag RNC with Politico and tweet us your questions at Politico.
In about a minute, we'll be talking to Jared Kushner, the senior advisor to President Trump. But first, today's Plug-in with Playbook will include the final segment of the new Swing States Map, hosted by senior politics editor Charlie Mahtesian and national political reporter Elena Schneider. Today's edition is focused on North Carolina, the Tar Heel state, and why it is among the states likely to shape the electoral outcome in just a few months. That will be followed by senior technology reporter Nancy Scola discussing Trump's digital strategy with Eric Wilson, a digital strategist who has worked with Republican candidates and who is now a fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School.
All right, with that, let's get started. Mr. Kushner, thank you so much for joining us this morning for Plug-in with Playbook.
It's great to be with you guys this morning.
All right, well, the convention ends tonight with a speech by the president. You are known in the president's operation as being someone who's very focused intently on metrics. Help us square this circle. Much of the polling in many of the states doesn't look too hot for the president right now. Can you give us some numbers and places we should be watching to convince us come October that this remains a winnable race for the president?
Sure. So I think that you have to look at two things. One is a lot of the polls were wrong in the last election, and I think they're making the exact same mistake this time. If you look at between Labor Day and the election last time, there was 120 different polls in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, 3 states the president won. Only one of those 120 had him winning. So I do think the polling methodology in the ages of cell phones and internet and how the electorate has kind of divided is obviously very flawed. But if you look at where the president is, we believe that his strength and his base has grown substantially. Last time, there was a lot of people who were saying, let's take a chance on him because we wanted an outsider. This time, he's shown that he keeps his promises. He's gotten everything done. The president actually jokes and says he believes he's actually kept more promises than he's made in the first 4 years. And we've made a lot more promises that will keep Americans safe and help them have better lives. And so if you go state by state, I think that all the states that he won last time, regardless of what the public polls show, he's basically ahead in or within the margin of. Obviously, our ground operation is robust. We've spent a lot of money on data and building out staff. So we feel like we have a very strong team. We'll be able to turn out the vote. We know where our voters are, and we believe there's plenty of them out there in order for the president to win. And just, one example is a state like Minnesota. Last time we had one staffer in Minnesota, and we moved that staffer to Colorado with about 45 days left. We lost Minnesota by 44,000 votes, 1.5%. Since then, that state's continued to move more and more towards the president. They don't like what they're seeing in Minneapolis with the riots. And then in addition, at the convention, we had one of the mayors who's a lifelong Democrat, say he's voting for Trump, and a lot of traditional Democrats will be. Now we have 80 staffers in the state. We've had a great, robust operation there, and we're very excited that we have the ability to do that. So, in all the states we won last time, we feel like it's very competitive, and in a lot of states that we didn't win last time, we feel like it's very competitive. And so, look, the American people like the president's platform. They like his policies. They want, a president who's going to be bringing jobs back to America from overseas. They want law and order. They want somebody who's going to keep their community safe. And again, there's some people who love everything about him. There's some people who don't love his style. But at the end of the day, the American people will have to decide, who do you want negotiating for you against China and other countries? And, President Trump's the guy who's, he's a tough guy, but he's going to be their tough guy. And I do believe the American people will go for that.
Jared, I'm a skeptic of most things, but I'm going to play true to form here.
It's one of your endearing traits.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Now, I want to ask you, why is there such a disparity here? I mean, we're not looking at, it's not that like 2 or 3 polls show him down in swing states. It's that every bit of public evidence shows one thing. And I understand in 2016 was probably the same thing. You would hope, you would assume that pollsters have learned their mistakes from 2016. Why is there this disparity? You're telling us in every swing state he's ahead or within the margin, but in every public poll, it shows something completely different.
Right. So if you look at the kind of the media, and again, I don't want to be critical of the media, but
You can be. That's okay.
but it's kind of something that happens every now and then. But the reality is that everyone got 2016 wrong, and nobody got fired. There were no consequences. Nobody did a reevaluation. Instead, they said, "Oh, we weren't wrong. It must have been Russia." And so then they spent 2 years chasing that collusion narrative, and that ended up becoming totally debunked. President Trump won because he was in touch with the American people between California and New York. All the flyover states. These are people who wanted an outsider. They didn't feel like Washington was working for them, and they went with him. But if you just go down to methodology, look, I'm a big data guy. I'm a big believer that if you can measure something, you can manage it. The first sign for me on the fact that the public polling was off was on Brexit. So if you looked at Brexit, they actually projected within a couple 100,000 how many people were going to vote for stay, but they undercounted by about 3 million how many people were going to vote to leave. And the reason why is they just had the turnout model wrong. So they undercounted a lot of the low propensity voters. When you think about the last election, I think the same thing happened. So, when we did a sample, I was very wary because we built our own turnout model. We had a database of about 10 million people. Now our database is, many times that. But we had a sample of about 10 million people, and we saw we had a lot of low propensity voters who were waiting online for 24 hours to come to President Trump's rallies. And so we figured if they were going to wait online, they would probably vote as well. And so we built two different turnout models. Now, we were very wary because the Romney team thought they were going to win up until election night. And so we didn't want to believe our own BS, but we basically would do the sample and then we'd run it through two models. We did the Romney Obama turnout model, which was basically how a lot of the media was doing it, which was kind of intuitive, but not scientific. And then we kind of, built off of our 10 million sample size, a different turnout model, which we think was much more technical. And we basically would do the samples and then we'd run it through both. And it showed us one that we were going to win, one that we were going to lose. I just think that we have to look at what's the turnout. If you look at a lot of the public polling, they're using 24% Republican turnout, which is ridiculous. In 18 and 16, you had 33%. I also think you have a lot of shy Trump voters out there, and a lot of them also don't use likely voters in their samples. So, and then they're also doing national polls as opposed to the swing state polls. So I think that you're going to find that as this goes, it's continuing to tighten, all the data showing that. And again, it's, the election's about, it's a one-day occurrence, and we feel like we're ready to turn out our vote and to hopefully win in a big way.
I think one of the questions that a lot of people are asking is, what is your strategy on ads? The Trump campaign is being outspent on TV right now. You pulled down reservations yesterday. Can you walk us through kind of what your thinking is right now on that?
Yeah. So obviously during the conventions, that kind of blocks out the sun a little bit. I think after Labor Day, you're going to see a really aggressive campaign all the way through the finish. Obviously, we're looking at which states there's voting in at different times. And so, you have to, we think about this in Washington all the time, but a lot of the American people, they don't get focused on this until right before. So we know who obviously the Trump strong supporters are. We know what we need to do to turn them out. I think last week we made over 1 million phone calls. We have over 1.5 million volunteers. We're touching them. We're talking to them. And then we know who the swing voters are. And we've been, testing over the last 6 months a lot of the messages that help persuade them. Obviously, times change. So you have to continue to be nimble. But between our digital operation and our TV operation, you'll see great. But if you notice this week and last week, we obviously reserved in January the YouTube homepage, which is probably the best CPM you can buy on the planet. We pre-reserved that for a lot of different instances. So we're doing a lot of online targeted to different audiences. And you're going to see, again, a good rush as we go forward. We know which voters we need to talk to, and we believe that we have the resources and the operation to get the job done.
What is Bill Stepien doing better or different than Parscale was doing when he was running the campaign?
Look, Bill was on the campaign before, and Brad's still on the campaign. So, they changed roles. Bill took more of an overview role. Bill's run a campaign before. Brad, again, I was at the office the other night, and, we've got a tremendous team. Brad was instrumental in, setting up a lot of the operations, setting the data up, and hiring a lot of the folks. Bill's was always more involved in the ground operation, the GOTV. Mm-hmm. Bill has obviously tightened things up. He's again, I think we went from kind of, a 2-year build, which people thought we built too early, but now people are pretty happy that we have all the resources, the infrastructure we have. He increased the cadence to be kind of, just a final stretch wartime cadence. And so, we're seeing, good activity there, but that also frees Brad up to do what he's great at, which is really, look at the data, work on the persuasion universes. And that's what he did in the last campaign very well. And that's what he's going to be focused on now. So, Bill is a phenomenal field general. He did a great job in the last campaign. He was one of the unsung heroes, and him and his team are doing a great job now as well.
wonder if you could react a bit to the shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin. You've been active, obviously, in criminal justice issues, and we've covered intently your effort to enact police reform. What do you make of the NBA protesting and looking to give up the season? And do you kind of specifically support peaceful protest like the NBA is doing right now?
Look, I do think that peaceful protest has a place and it has importance. I obviously hope that they're conscious about not, getting into a position where it's going to be, spreading the virus. Like I do believe there were some instances last time where that led to some spreads. But I do think that what we need to do right now is make sure that we take the anchor that people have, and we have to move from slogans to constructive solutions. And again, you look at a lot of these cities, and you look at a lot of these politicians who were talking last week. They've done a lot of complaining, but a lot of these people have been here for decades, and they haven't gotten anything done. And so, I just feel like we need to move the conversation forward. And if you look at President Trump's track record for the last 4 years, people complained about the criminal justice system and the racial inequalities that existed. Well, he took on that issue and he brought a solution, right? He got, the historic criminal justice reform passed, which was bipartisan. He unified people and brought people together around that, not by bowing, but by being tough, supporting law enforcement and by, finding a way that will make communities safer. Same thing, people talk about wealth inequality in a lot of these communities. Again, you don't, improve wealth equality by kind of rioting and burning down stores. You do it by doing what President Trump did, which was create opportunity zones. We have new programs we're going to launch that create better access to capital for people in the Black community, for Black small business owners, that hopefully will allow us to reverse the tide. And obviously there's education. President Trump's been fighting to get people out of failed schools and into charter schools, and he's found a lot of resistance from Democrats on that. And then in addition to that, he funded the historically Black colleges and universities. President Trump's willing to work with the police. Look, most people in all communities, they love the police. They want the police there. There are obviously a few bad cops, and there are also some great cops that make mistakes. We want to work through that very closely, but we need to have constructive dialogue. I think that, this country's seen enough of the protests and, some of the negative things that could happen, when the protests go too far or are hijacked by people who have a different agenda than maybe the well-intended protesters. But we need to bring it to constructive solutions. So I just think that, look, we're offering solutions with policy. The other side's doing a lot of complaining. And, what I'd love to see from the players in the NBA, again, they have the luxury of taking, a night off from work. Most Americans don't have the financial luxury to do that. I think that it's nice that they're standing up for the issue, but I'd like to see them start moving into concrete solutions that are productive. And again, President Trump in this White House is willing to work with them. We've reached across the aisle many times, but we actually have policies and the ability to execute them. And we have a track record of getting things done that actually improve, people's lives and make a difference, unlike a lot of the people who are claiming to be their saviors.
To be clear, I want to move on from this topic, but to be clear, LeBron James has put $1 million into voting. They have been doing some of this stuff, but I hear you want them to work with the president. I understand that.
What I would say, look, LeBron James also opened a phenomenal charter school, which is making a big difference in Cleveland, but then he's backing people who want to close down charter schools. I think, look, if LeBron James reached out to the White House or we could reach out to him, we're happy to talk with him and say, look, let's both agree on what we want to accomplish and let's come up with a common pathway to get there. But being angry and meeting, you're not going to solve any problems.
Have you reached out to him?
I have not. If you'd like, I'll reach out to him today.
If you have a number, give it to me, and I'd like to have a couple basketball questions for him too. Now, let me ask you about COVID, the COVID response. One quick question on that I want to move to the Middle East. Is there anything you wish you could do differently had you had the opportunity to do this again?
Look, Jake, I'll say this. You cover, a lot of the water cooler of Washington, and how politicians are and what they do. People were much less critical in the beginning when this was in full-blown crisis mode. You had a lot of, governors who were asking for things they didn't need, creating a lot of panic. And quite frankly, we were there every step of the way, bailing them out and getting them the resources they need. We managed our resources correctly. We made the right decision to shut down. Some people delayed too long. And then obviously opening up, we've tried to figure out how to balance the health and wellness of our country and saving as many lives as possible. So I think that it's a global pandemic. You can second guess a lot of things, but I think overall we've made way more right decisions than wrong decisions. And as a result, I think you'll see that we're going to come out of this much stronger than most countries. And obviously, we're developing great therapeutics. We're making great progress on a vaccine. And one thing we're seeing now is cases again are coming down. by over 30% over the last month. Test positivity rate is now down 5%. But again, I will see, I would see certain politicians, they tweet every day, there's no testing plan. We submitted a testing plan to Congress. We've released it. We worked with every governor on what their statewide testing plan is. We've gotten them all the resources they've asked for. And then, you have other politicians saying, well, they haven't used the Defense Production Act as we were using the Defense Production Act. So, you have a lot of politicians who we would speak to and try to explain what we're doing. We'd ask them for help. They'd say great things to us on the phone. Then they go out and give press conferences and criticize us. So I just don't think it's helpful to the public for people to be politicizing this. You have people who are dying. You have a lot of hardship. You have people who have lost jobs. You have people who are scared. And quite frankly, I think a lot of the political division that is being caused by people who are criticizing the response is creating more division than it is helping solve problems. So again, I even saw, Joe Biden laid out a whole plan for what he'd do, and everything in his plan are things that we either already have done or in the process of doing, other than obviously mandating masks. So again, I haven't seen a ton of constructiveness. And again, a lot of the people who are criticizing, they've also had a lot of wrong predictions over the last year as well.
I just have one question to follow up, and then I'll let Jake take it over. But on that, do you think this administration has had an empathy gap? I mean, I think you talked a lot about the politics. It's what we cover every day, kind of the inside baseball. But I do think when you talk to Americans across the country, they wonder sometimes if the president can feel their pain on this issue, that 177,000 Americans have died, and that there's kind of been a gap and missing from the messaging from this White House.
Look, what I find with the president is that he'll say the right things often, but they don't get covered, and people want him to say it over and over again. He is who he is, but he gets things done. And, actually, Tim Scott said it to me the best, where he said, words of encouragement are not the president's love language. His actions and his successes and his results are his love language. So, when President Trump, hears that somebody's hurting, he wants to help them. And he's shown that time and time again. But, you've got a lot of politicians who can give speeches and talk about, and be moralists and then lecture you. But, very few of them actually deliver results. So at the end of the day, if President Trump is who he is, he's been this way for his whole life. He ran this way. He's governed this way. He'll continue to govern this way. But again, the one thing he has a track record of delivering and getting things done. And when he tells you he's going to do something, he's going to do it. So if you're asking whether he's a typical politician, the answer is absolutely not. And he's not pretending to be.
Let's move to the Middle East, which is very timely. You are headed there next week, as has been reported. As you know, again, I've been quite skeptical of your efforts in the Middle East, but you had a huge breakthrough last week. When you announced that the United Arab Emirates was moving toward normalization with the Israelis, a big step in the Middle East. And your strategy, let's speak from 30,000 feet for a second, has been to isolate the Palestinians, right? To make it clear that the entire Arab world, or the majority of the Arab world, wants normalization instead of waiting for what you consider to be kind of an endless and fruitless peace process that the United States has engaged in for the last 50 or 60 years.
Our strategy has not been to isolate the Palestinians. Our strategy has just been to not do stupid things. And, if you ask me what we've been fighting against for a long time, the notion was we're just fighting against habit, right? People just have a habit of saying certain things that don't make any sense. I'll give you an example. We had a call at the quartet yesterday, and they said, we have to go and meet with the Palestinians. They have a financial crisis, and then there's an issue in Gaza where Israel's not allowing gas into Gaza, and they've got crisis. And we said, wait a minute. So basically the reason why you have a financial crisis is because they're not taking the funding that is in the escrow account that Israel wants to give them. So it's a self-made financial crisis. And then in Gaza, the only reason why they have conflict is because they're shooting rockets and balloons into Israel. So the notion is like, in the past, people would rush and try to help them, but we just haven't rewarded bad behavior. When they came out and they started criticizing America when we moved the embassy, we basically said, okay, well, we're not sending you money anymore. We're not going to send American taxpayer money over to a country to a people who basically insult America and take our largesse for granted. So we've just taken a common sense approach. We've tried not to do stupid things. Again, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, everyone said that the world was going to end. And then obviously the president did it. And the next morning, the sun rose. The next evening, the sun set. But the president said, look, A, I want to keep my promise. B, it's the right thing to do. And C, it's I think that he earned a lot of trust from Israel and from the region because people know that he's not going to be intimidated into not doing what he thinks is right. So we've just tried to do common sense things. But the problem we have in the Middle East, and actually, Jerry, Jerry Baker wrote a phenomenal article about this in the Journal. I think it was 2 days ago, where he basically said the people who've been doing it for the last 10 years are the people who led to Iran getting a pathway to nuclear weapon, $150 billion and $2 billion in cash. ISIS became a caliphate the size of Ohio. We never stopped the counterterror finance or the extremism like we did Libya, Syria, Yemen. Iraq all became total messes. And so it's not like the track record of accomplishment before us by all of the experts was that good. So we came in and we just, started talking bluntly. We built our alliances with Israel, with the Gulf Arab countries. And again, we went there. For me, for the first year, I did a lot more listening than talking. And I heard from them what they thought the problems were and how they thought we should solve it. And, we tried to create commonality around what people wanted to accomplish. You could either use conventional thinking and, get the same conventional outcomes by doing conventional things, where you can say, okay, what are our common goals? What are our common things that we can both accomplish, and how do we bring people to get there? And so, look, the Palestinians, we have telephones, we're open, we talk to different people. Again, President Trump has laid out a great vision for them. If they ever are interested in helping the Palestinian people, they can. But if you think about where we are, they now have a proposal on the table for a Palestinian state from Israel, something they did not have at the beginning of this administration. There is a map that Israel has agreed to negotiate on the basis of that's never been done before in the history of the negotiation. We've built a full business plan that could take their economy and double their GDP, create a new million new jobs, and reduce their poverty by 50%. I mean, it's only 5 million people. It's not that hard. And we studied, how economies have been built. But their problem has not been Israel. Their problem has just been that their leadership is stuck in a paradigm. Maybe they don't have the political capital to do it. But I do believe that if they show courage and if they're willing to take a little bit of risk, I think under this president, he's shown that by doing things in an unconventional way, incredible things are possible. And I do believe that he could actually be the first person to lead the Palestinian people to a place where they have self-determination, hope, and a lot of economic opportunity. But again, the current leadership has a 25-year track record of just not making a deal and not being successful. But the thing's been a cash cow for them, and that's because the international community is just stuck in a paradigm where they just do irrational things. So our notion has not been to isolate them. I think they've isolated themselves by taking advantage of a lot of people in the world who are well-intended in trying to help them. But if they, you can't want people to want a better life for themselves more than they want it themselves. And I think that's where President Trump is just a pragmatist. And again, whether it's, the inner cities, we can't want people to want, a better life or to make a bigger difference more than they want to do it themselves. So, if we have people who are willing to take the step and do the hard things it takes to, to make their lives better, whether it's here in America or it's abroad, President Trump is willing to sit down, listen, be constructive, and find creative solutions. And again, he's got a track record, unlike anyone else in Washington, of getting things done and achieving results.
Anna?
Yes, I am sorry. We are quickly running out of time. So I think we're going to finish on this one. January 2021, where will you be?
Look, when I came down to Washington, I wasn't sure where I'd be 6 months later. So what I would say is that, my life has been an incredible journey. Obviously, I never thought I'd be working in the White House. I try to focus on the task at hand. And I think right now I'm very focused on my trip next week to the Middle East. Hopefully we can, make this peace agreement, hold very, very firmly. And hopefully we can, use this breakthrough to get more momentum. I'm focused here at home on some domestic policies and obviously on helping the president, get through the pandemic. We've got hurricanes this weekend that obviously we're monitoring very closely. We've got, different situations throughout the country. So I think thinking a few weeks ahead in my life is not really a luxury that I have. So here we're just focused on doing the best job we can for the American people. And for every minute that I'm in government service, I'm going to spend every second I can trying to accomplish as much as I can. And again, I've taken criticism from even places like your Playbook for taking on too many things and for taking on the hard things. But my attitude is that this public service is an honor for me to do. It's a short period in my life relative to the duration of my life. And so while I'm here, I'm going to do everything I can to have as much impact as possible. And I want to take on the hard challenges, not the easy challenges, because I don't mind being criticized along the way. And hopefully when we're done, we'll be able to. And I think I've shown we can put up some great successes in those. And I think that'll make America and the country, America and the world a better place. So we're just going to work every day, and it's really up to God and then I guess the American people. What will happen in November.
Well, right. You don't mind the criticism, and we don't mind criticizing. So a good relationship. But thank you very much for being with us this morning. Plug It with Playbook continues.
Let's kick it over to senior politics editor Charlie Mahtesian and national political reporter Elena Schneider, who will talk us through a final edition of New Swing States Map. Today's focus is on North Carolina.
Good morning. I'm Charlie Mahtesian, senior politics editor at Politico. Good morning. I'm Charlie Mahtesian, senior politics editor at Politico. The electoral map has changed quite a bit thanks to the architecture of President Trump's 2016 victory, and I'm joined by my colleague, political reporter Elena Schneider, to explore the new swing states map that will shape the 2020 presidential outcome. Throughout the two political conventions, we'll take a look at a total of 6 states that are at the heart of the electoral map that Donald Trump has reshaped.
So today we are focused on North Carolina, and I've covered North Carolina for years, drilling down into the congressional and Senate races that have helped determine the balance of power in Washington, as well as charting the year-long battle with the bathroom bill, which ripped apart the state in 2016 and 2017. But before we dive into North Carolina, Politico video producer Mary Newman is providing us with some background into the dynamics at play in the state.
Political strategy can manifest itself in many forms. There's smear campaigns, ad buys, but this year, voter suppression and fraud has taken center stage.
Now to President Trump escalating his campaign against voting by mail.
Long lines and confusion.
Shortage of ballots.
Partisan electoral maps. This
and
this could be a preview of the general election in November.
But if there is one state where the actual act of voting is a factor, it's North Carolina. Political and racial division in North Carolina runs deep. Electoral tensions can be traced all the way back to the 1898 election, when the KKK used violence to discourage black voter turnout. The state's voting history has been split pretty evenly. Their deep Southern Democratic roots began to turn red in the 1970s, following President Johnson's support and signatures of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Civil Rights Act in '68. And not much has changed. It's still a swing state. Just look at 2016, when they voted for both Donald Trump and Democrat Roy Cooper for governor. Another layer to this is the state's rapidly changing demographics. The state has seen some of the highest net in-migration from blue states like California, New Jersey, and New York, gaining more than 10,000 residents from each state just in 2018. People of color, unmarried women, and millennials, voting blocs that traditionally vote for Democrats, are growing and will make up more than half of the eligible voters in the 2020 election. Similar to 2016, the Trump campaign has put race at the center of his re-election messaging. But that could backfire for Trump in a state like North Carolina, especially as the national debate over mail-in voting and possible voter fraud is spreading like wildfire. There was a serious case of voter fraud by a Republican candidate that rendered an entire election illegitimate. There's been legal battles over gerrymandered maps and voter ID laws, not to mention corruption implicating top GOP officials. So how does this impact the 2020 election? Let's break it down. Back in 2010, Republicans won control of both the House and the Senate, and they've been working to change the political infrastructure of the state ever since, resulting in Republican control of 10 out of the 13 congressional seats. Because in 2013, the Supreme Court's landmark decision in Shelby v. Holder allowed 9 states, including North Carolina, to now change their election laws without that federal approval. And within 2 months, the state legislature passed a new law imposing stricter voter ID rules. Democrats in the state had been filing lawsuits against a lot of these actions since 2010, including a group of voters that sued the North Carolina GOP in federal court. Their argument? Republicans were intentionally concentrating black voters into a handful of state, Senate, and congressional districts. As political tensions increased across the state, the lower courts had blocked 2 major efforts by the GOP, deciding that their voter ID laws were unconstitutional and that their redistricting had relied too much on race. These decisions are fresh in the minds of North Carolina voters, and Trump's stances on voter ID laws.
The time has come for voter ID.
Voter fraud.
If we went to mail-in balloting,
our election all over the world would look as a total joke.
And his overall rhetoric on race,
everybody's called a racist now,
could push the evolving electorate in North Carolina and their 15 electoral votes back to blue in November.
Elena, you grew up in North Carolina, so for your entire life, with one exception, a Republican has carried North Carolina's presidential vote. The only exception, of course, was Obama, and he only managed to do it once. What did he do in 2008 that other Democrats could not?
So Barack Obama's election in 2008 was historic for a number of reasons, but in North Carolina in particular, he was able to build a coalition of voters that the state had never seen before. So chief among those was historic turnout among African-American voters and historic turnout among young voters, under 30, think particularly college students. That's something that no other candidate, at least on the Democratic side, has been able to replicate since then. But the state has really remained competitive because of the demographic shifts that have happened in this state. So there's been an enormous amount of growth in suburban and urban parts of the state, while some population loss in rural parts of the state. So if you think about those in terms of party affiliations, suburban and urban areas, but particularly urban areas, tend to be bluer, tend to be more Democratic, versus rural areas that tend to be more Republican. So that population growth has given Democrats at least a little bit more of a demographic edge. But if you look at party affiliation, the state is very much a swing state in terms of how people are registered. So it's about a third, a third, a third. So a third Republican, a third Democrat, and a third unaffiliated. But in the last couple of years, that unaffiliated group, so people who don't want to state their affiliation to a party, so independence is another way to describe it, that group has grown, and they're getting closer to almost 40% in terms of how people are declaring themselves in terms of their voter participation, voter registration. And so that is really a key group that if either party wants to win, that's where they have to win it, are with those unaffiliated voters. And we saw an example of that in 2016. So this was the year that Donald Trump won North Carolina in terms of the presidential map. But at the same time, Democratic Governor Roy Cooper won election there for the first time. So there are clearly unaffiliated voters or split ticket voters who are willing to both vote for Donald Trump and Roy Cooper at the same time. And that's part of what makes North Carolina so interesting as a state, because those voters really do exist there.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the suburban aspect, because one part of the state where the president really seems to be struggling is in North Carolina is the suburbs, particularly around the Raleigh-Durham area. How much of a problem does that pose for Trump this year?
So this is the problem for Trump come November. So when I talk to Republican strategists in North Carolina, this is the area, this is the demographic group that they talk about most frequently as the segment that they are most worried about and could really decide it for him. So we saw this back in 2018 when I was covering House races. We saw how Democrats were able to change the map of how Democrats won by winning in these suburban areas that they traditionally had not won before. Think places like Orange County, California, the home of sort of Reagan world Republicans, that turned blue. Places around Charleston, South Carolina, that's another example of a place that turned blue for the first time in years. So suburban areas where white, college-educated, and often women are voting for Democrats, sometimes for the first time, but are showing up for Democrats in a new way. And that still bears out in North Carolina, where we've got three major areas where suburban growth has really shut up. So you mentioned it, Raleigh-Durham area, the Charlotte area, but also Winston-Salem and Greensboro. So those three sort of hotspots are all areas where Biden could cobble together enough sort of suburban white support to overcome those rural areas that Trump has really dominated in the past.
Well, obviously, North Carolina is a state that will play a pivotal role in deciding Donald Trump's fate, but it's also one of the most important states in the nation in terms of other significant statewide races. What makes it such an important state to watch this year?
So we've got some of the most exciting down ballot races happening in North Carolina that are really going to give us some real tells about how the rest of the map is going to look for the House and for the Senate. So at the top of the ticket underneath the presidential, we've got a gubernatorial race, a Senate race, and several congressional races that are going to be really key. Those House races are in fact going to be really big deal because they could likely change the congressional composition of the North Carolina delegation because of redistricting and a whole host of litigation that's moved through, the map really looks different. So there are 2 House races that are likely to turn blue and a third that's very competitive. So that could change the composition of the delegation from 3 out of 13 being Democrats to almost 50-50. And that's really going to change things in the House. But the 2 races that I really want to focus on are the governor race and the Senate race. So they are both tied to the top of the ticket and how Trump or Biden performs in the state, but one a little more than the other. So the one that's less tied is the governor's race. So this is Roy Cooper, who is now up for re-election. He won in 2016, the same time that Donald Trump won, and he's running again. And he's somebody who governors are able to build a little bit more of a brand for themselves that's separate and apart from their national party. It's not easy, but it's possible. And especially in difficult, sort of turbulent times, think natural disasters like a hurricane or say a pandemic, this is sort of a way for them to build their own brand. And Cooper has consistently gotten high marks in how he's handled these crises. And he's somebody who is sitting in a pretty good position. Look, there's still 3 months, but he's in a pretty good position right now to hold on to this seat. In contrast to that, the race that's much more tied to the top of the ticket is Tom Tillis. So Tom Tillis is a Senate Republican who's running for re-election. And he's somebody who really is a bit more reliant on how Trump does for how he himself is going to do. Ultimately, he's still a federal candidate, means you're much more tied into sort of what your party does and how your party is faring. And what Tillis hopes Trump will do and will help him do is turn Biden and Cal Cunningham, his Democratic opponent, into tools of sort of the liberal left or the radical left, making them unpalatable to those unaffiliated voters that we talked about earlier and sort of scaring them away from supporting a Democrat. And that's sort of what's going to be key for them to pull this off.
So we've only got a limited amount of time left. So let's do a quick lightning round of questions. Let me ask you this. If there's one thing the Trump campaign must do to win North Carolina, what would that be?
So I'm going to cheat a little bit in this because I think there's sort of a what he can do or what he's likely to do versus what he's will do and what people expect him in the state to actually do. So Republican strategists, when I posed this question to them, said what he could do is act more presidential, is to simply tone down the tweets, tone down the behavior problems that those unaffiliated voters have talked about as the issue for them, because what really comes up is not so much concerns about his policy positions among unaffiliated voters, but more his behavior and how he's handled this coronavirus crisis. But what's more likely and what they expect that he will do and what they hope is enough is whether or not he can, like I said, turn Biden into sort of a tool of the radical left, somebody who is controlled by people like Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, somebody who is beholden to them, that's the way that they can maybe scare off some of those unaffiliated voters that were considering Biden but who voted for Trump in the past. And so I think that's what they're hoping they'll be able to pull off. I realize that was not exactly a lightning round question to answer.
Not a lot of lightning there.
But back to you. Maybe you'll be a little shorter than me. So let me ask you the same question. What does the Biden campaign have to do to win North Carolina?
I'm going to cheat too, obviously, to open the gates. Well, I mean, I think, first of all, he needs to perform better than Hillary Clinton among white voters. In 2016, if you look at exit polls, whites cast 70% of the vote in North Carolina, and she won just 32% of the white vote. So he's got to do better than that. And then the other thing is, he just can't get killed in the North Carolina suburbs like Hillary Clinton did. She lost the North Carolina suburbs by 24 points against Donald Trump, who wasn't exactly beloved in the suburbs if you look at national and most state exit polls. So if Biden can't do better than that, he doesn't even deserve to win the state.
Well, thank you all for joining us in this new swing state map focusing on North Carolina. I would argue the best state in the country. And as Charlie said, we all knew that suburban voters were going to be key to either Trump or Biden's success come November. And I know I'm going to be watching my hometown suburbs in Winston-Salem very, very closely on election night to see how they fare. And I think that'll give us a big clue as to how ultimately the rest of the country is going to be voting.
This wraps up our new Swing States map series during Politico's conventions coverage. So to recap, we've covered Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, Florida, and finally today, North Carolina. We've discovered that in nearly all of these states, the suburbs are going to be pivotal. And one of the things that I've learned, at least, is that in most of these places, no one should rely too heavily on the polls, and certainly not the polling this far out from the general election. Thanks for watching, and take care.
reporter at Politico. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nancy Scola, and I'm a senior technology reporter at Politico. The Democratic and Republican conventions made history this month as the first U.S. presidential nominating conventions to be held, at least in part, virtually. 5 months into the coronavirus pandemic, the parties were forced to reimagine how to both convene party leaders and reach voters in a distributed way, all during one of the most consequential elections in recent memory. And it's not too much to say that the road from this month's conventions to the White House runs right through the internet. And that's why I'm thrilled to be joined this morning by Eric Wilson. Eric is a veteran Republican digital strategist. In 2016, Eric led digital strategy for the presidential campaign of Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Eric's currently a fellow at Harvard's Ash Center, and he's also working to grow the Republican digital ecosystem, including as managing partner at an accelerator called Startup Caucus. So this morning, we're going to dig into the Trump campaign's online strategy, talk about whether Facebook still matters, and discuss how the pandemic is shaping the Biden campaign's digital efforts. Thank you for being with us, Eric.
Hey, good morning, Nancy.
Good morning. You can follow, just to get some of the housekeeping out of the way, you can follow the conversation on social media using the hashtag RNC with Politico, and please tweet us your questions at Politico. Okay, with that, let's dive in. So Eric, when we spoke earlier in preparation for this talk, you said that when it comes to online strategy, during this election, the Trump campaign has been running a masterclass in digital marketing, including something you called permission-based marketing. Can you explain why you said that, what that is and why you said that?
So, in order to mobilize your voters and raise the money that you need to be successful, no matter what level you're at, you need to have a permission-based audience that you own. So that's through email, text messaging, your website, and increasingly your own app. So the Trump campaign never shut down after 2016, and they've been pouring millions of dollars every month into building that audience. And we're seeing now their mobilization of that and activation of that audience.
Okay. And what does that look like in practice? How are they activating that audience day in and day out, maybe in ways that we're not seeing?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, anyone who signed up to get text messages knows that they've been going wild during the convention. And similarly, emails are very active, push notifications on the app. It's all working in concert to make sure that the Trump campaign has significant mind share for its most dedicated supporters. So they're going out and taking the message to their friends, their neighbors, coworkers, and getting everyone ready to start voting.
Okay. One of the things we were fixated on in 2016 was Facebook, Facebook ads in particular. The Trump campaign famously after the election said Facebook ads were a secret weapon. In the last 4 years, most of what you hear about Facebook is bad news. People sort of leaving the surface, people souring on it. Young people don't care about Facebook anymore. Is Facebook still a powerful tool for the Trump campaign?
Well, I'm no fan of Facebook either, but the fact of the matter is it commands so much attention of voters, not just on the Facebook platform itself, but also areas like WhatsApp and Instagram. And so for campaigns, it's one of the most important places to engage with voters and meet them where they are. So, modern campaigning, tech-enabled campaigning is all about reaching the right voter with the right message at the right moment with the right messenger. And so Facebook is where a lot of people are spending those moments. So you've got to go reach them there. And it still is a powerful channel. And despite the new hoops that they've made campaigns go through, it's still number one when campaigns are trying to advertise in terms of direct response, getting people to sign up, donate, volunteer, turn out at events, and as well as persuasion.
Let's talk a little bit why you're not a big fan of Facebook. Is it the new rules that Facebook's put in place when it comes to political advertising, and maybe you can explain what those rules are, or are there other things about the platform that you don't think are terrific?
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that they have decided that the problem with the platform and their engagement in the elections are legitimate campaigns. Right. So these are candidates who are filing disclosures to the FEC. They're accountable to voters. They're scrutinized by journalists and put them through a ton of scrutiny. Meanwhile, sort of amateur bad actors and foreign bad actors are allowed to roam free. And so what I think should happen is a more logical approach to sort of handling political speech, specifically from candidates and political parties on the platform, not unlike what we see with TV, radio, and postal mail.
And you've mentioned that one of your concerns about Facebook, I think it's Facebook in particular, is that their algorithm tends to reward people for being a little bit sensational, a little bit outrageous. That tends to benefit somebody like President Trump, who engages online in a pretty spirited fashion. If I can, spirit is one adjective people use. Some people say, he sort of stretches the bounds of truth, that sort of thing. If that algorithm is rewarding President Trump, what are the solutions to that? If you think that is a problem.
Well, I think it's important to take the question away from the particular, who benefits, who doesn't benefit, and think to ourselves, do we want our candidates and campaigns for the president, Senate, Congress, all the way down to city council to be having to use the same marketing techniques that consumer companies use to sell us soap and cars and software? And that's really what's happening. And so, you would be foolish not to take advantage of that algorithm and try and get lower rates for your advertising by exploiting that engagement. One of the problems is we just don't have any transparency of what that effect is. Research shows that the Trump campaign spent less on Facebook ads in 2016 comparatively per ad than the Clinton campaign, because they really understood how to take advantage of that algorithm. So I would really like to see Facebook and other platforms move to flat rates for candidates, guaranteed distribution for organic posts, so candidates and campaigns can get away from having to play this game of teasing the algorithm.
Okay, let's switch platforms, talk about Twitter for a moment. The fixation in the last 4 years since the last election has been on Twitter and President Trump's use of his Twitter feed in particular. He, as I mentioned, he's very spirited online on social media. Is that a net asset to his campaign or a net negative?
It's absolutely an asset, and I'll tell you why. It's because the key to doing social media correctly is right there in the name. It's social. We have social relationships with people, not brands or organizations or buildings. And that's how President Trump speaks. And so he's going to tweet that way. And so I think any candidate who is running in 2020 needs to have their voice on at least one social media channel. Look, it's not about copying the all caps or, branding other people. It's about having that authentic voice. I think it was kind of humorous early on in the Democratic primary when it sort of turned into Food Network. You saw everyone in their kitchens because they were mimicking AOC. The point wasn't being in the kitchen. It was engaging with your voters, doing something you normally do and behaving like a real person.
If you were advising, I know you're not advising the Trump campaign right now, but if you were, would you give any guidance on how the use of that Twitter feed might be affecting swing voters who might be on the fence about whether or not they voted for him last time, going to vote for him again, or they're just making up their minds between him and Joe Biden? You can see, we hear anecdotally that some people are turned off by the way he tweets. Is there any guidance you'd give them on that front?
Yeah, I think in general, the people complaining about the tweets is sort of a proxy for complaining about other things. So those complaints really aren't about the tweets. I would say right now, you use that Twitter feed to fire up your grassroots, your base, the people who are going to go text their friends, share on Facebook, make sure that they get everyone in their house to send in their ballots, and just make sure that you don't let up on the gas in these final 68 days.
Okay. Switching gears to the Biden campaign, last week I spoke with Caitlin Mitchell. She's a senior digital advisor for the Biden campaign. And she talked about how the fact that the voice that Joe Biden uses online in line with your guidance matches Joe Biden, right? She said, Joe Biden is wholesome. We push out wholesome content. Joe Biden isn't sarcastic. Joe Biden doesn't dunk on people, so we don't use that voice online. Is that the right approach for them?
Well, you should absolutely use an authentic voice, but they're doing it in the wrong way. They're not doing it in a way that understands the architecture of the social web, of how information is distributed. And the only way that a candidate's going to be able to cut through all of the noise right now is to surprise people. And Joe Biden isn't doing that. And so I think that's really where they're struggling. He's not comfortable online. He's not digitally native in the way that President Trump and most of his team are. And so I think the other realization that either the Biden campaign doesn't understand or refuses to admit is that most voters are consuming politics as entertainment. Now, I want to be very clear, like the issues are important, but in terms of the style of consumption, it's all entertainment right now. And the Biden show is not binge worthy.
So how do you match a voice like Joe Biden's, his sort of wholesome, authentic voice, with the desire to produce entertainment?
Oh, I'm not going to give away free strategy this close to the election.
Okay. You mentioned, fair enough. You mentioned back in May that the pandemic, and related shutdowns have been a disaster for the Biden campaign. As we mentioned in the run up to this conversation, that the campaigns have been forced to go largely digital, if not wholly digital. And you mentioned back in May that that's been a disaster for the campaign. Do you still think that's true? And if so, why?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, having a couple of good weeks or a convention that a lot of people tweeted about is fine. But what's happening underneath the surface is you're building a campaign digital marketing infrastructure. And the Trump campaign has been doing that since 2016. They never stopped. And the Biden campaign, he knew he was going to run for president and still struggled to build the digital infrastructure that you need to be effective and reach voters and raise money. And you can't catch up with that in a couple of weeks. It's very hard to do in a few months. So, one of the things that we saw in the pandemic is that a lot of trends got accelerated really quickly. And one of those is virtual campaigning, the importance of those owned audiences, permission-based marketing. And the Biden campaign wasn't working on that. And then they got caught flat-footed once everything went virtual and you couldn't do the traditional campaigning.
And you mentioned when we spoke that one of the things that you think Democrats have gotten pretty good at over the last 4 years in particular is what you called relational organizing. And the sort of simple definition of that would be people being convinced to take political action by people that they already know. Can you talk a little bit more about that and then why you paid Democrats that compliment?
Yeah, so relational organizing is nothing new to anyone who's been working in politics. It's why endorsements are important. So you're using people who are influential to influence other people. And what has happened, though, in the last couple of years is just, technology around relational graph databases has made technologically enabled relational organizing more practical. And so the Dems really pioneered this all the way back in 2012 with the Obama Facebook app where you could connect with your friends. There are a number of apps out there that are used up and down the ballot. It was widely used to help the Democrats win the House in 2018, and we're playing catch up on the Republican side. We've got a platform called Swipe Red that I work with that is introducing the concept, but again, different challenges. But I really think that's the story coming out of 2020 is that relational organizing is here to stay and is a proven method for turning out voters.
Okay. One of the things that we've also witnessed over the last few months, actually, is the rise of something called the Lincoln Project, which something reporters tend to be fairly obsessed with. It's a group of mainstream Republicans who've decided that President Trump does not deserve to be reelected and have really kind of gone online to spread that message very aggressively using memes, very, sort of sarcastic, aggressive memes. When we spoke, you said that that's not even though it's getting a lot of eyeballs, particularly amongst the press, it's not the right way to go. Talk about why that's not working.
Well, I take exception, first of all, to them being Republican. They're running ads against Republican senators that's supporting Democrats. And so, but the point remains that, memes are inside jokes for out groups. And so when you're a mainstream group like this, like, sort of disaffected Republicans that are, sort of widely admired by the media and sort of the center, you're not one of those out groups. And so, an organization cannot create memes, right? They have to percolate up from the message boards, the subreddits, the Discord servers of these communities. And that's one thing that the Trump campaign does a really good job of, is making sure that they amplify the meme work that their supporters are already doing. And again, it's not for people like us who follow this at a minute by minute level. It's for people who want to signal that they're part of an in group, and that doesn't really work for an organization trying to drive that from the top down.
Just to push back on that, if it's not a measure of success that the sort of Washington media is following their Twitter feed pretty aggressively and maybe sort of taking away some framing, some thoughts from what they're injecting out into the world, that's not the sort of a win for them.
I think it's a win for them because that's the audience they're trying to reach, are the political elites and donor class, and seems to be working really well for them. But I don't think it moves votes.
Okay. We only have about a minute left. I wanted to ask you, when we spoke, you mentioned the fact that artificial intelligence is becoming more and more central to campaigning. We will eventually see, you said, AI helping to win a campaign. We may well have already seen it and not known it. Can you talk a little bit about why you said that?
Yeah, well, I think that the capabilities that we're seeing, even in the last couple of months, I mean, the pace with anyone who's been following OpenAI and GPT-3, just the complexity of tasks that AI is able to do, and at relatively smaller scale. We already know that AI is helping campaigns with their ad optimization. There are cases where it's helping with voter turnout, and so I think it's clear that we're going to be using artificial intelligence in the coming years to help campaigns with their prioritization, but also to have better insights into their electorate and their campaign.
Okay, so we're out of time. One of the things that jumps out to me from this conversation is you've been doing this a long time. You're pretty expert in it. And you think the Trump campaign has a pretty big advantage when it comes to digital. So I'm going to come back and talk to you in November and see how well that's panned out for the campaign.
All right, looking forward to it. Thanks, Nancy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Eric, for joining us with Plug In with Playbook. That's all the time we have. Thank you all for joining us and have a great day. Now let's turn it back over to Jake and Anna.
Thank you all for tuning in to Plug In with Playbook.
This wraps up our morning programming during the political conventions.
It has been great spending time with all of you, and thank you to all of our guests who joined us during the DNC and RNC. Take care and please stay safe.
Hey, my name's Eugene Daniels. I'm the host of Foursquare, Politico's digital video show with Tim Alberta, Laura Barron Lopez, and Ryan Lizza. During the convention, we'll be getting together to provide lots of analysis.
I think it strikes a lot of Republicans that Trump's only chance to get back into this race is if Democrats really do him a favor, if they really overreach.
Context.
It's not a new playbook for Trump, and it's also not a new playbook historically.
Also kind of amazing that the conventional wisdom that the person who would be best for Biden is an African-American woman.
And lots of lively discussion.
Goes over time and doesn't answer the question.
Who is it, Ryan?
It's the person who helped him govern.
No, give us a name. No, they have to pick a name.
Join us live tonight at 8:30 Eastern, covering today's big political news, the speeches, and everything else, giving you lots of anxiety nowadays.